everyone. I wanted to spend some time today talking about the difference between harm reduction versus abstinence in addiction recovery. So this is a great curiosity that a lot of people have. Oftentimes when a person enters therapy, the idea is that we start by picking a path which they want to walk along. Harm reduction is where we try to reduce the frequency or the duration of a certain substance or problematic behavior like gambling or, overusing tech like Instagram or pornography. So it's the idea that a person's not yet willing to eliminate it, but we're going to reduce it and try to focus on the consequences and the harms that come along with it. Abstinence is a little more straightforward. So that's somebody's commitment to eliminating one substance or behavior or, polysubstance use. So doing a few at the same time. And so it's 100% reduction. And then working on some of the symptoms, physical, emotional, traumatic symptoms that will come up following that. So the idea is that if you are wanting to pick a path, they look very different. So focusing on harm reduction, there's oftentimes a common misconception that harm reduction is supporting or encouraging somebody to use substances or continue to gamble. When really, harm reduction is about ensuring that a person can look at their behaviors while continuing to have dignity and respect, right? So harm reduction becomes important. It's a starting point for a lot of people. It reduces stigma. It opens up the realm of support to someone. And I think that when we're practicing harm reduction, you should be prepared to receive some education, develop some coping strategies, and start to talk about some of the issues that you're having with people. So harm reduction looks like a few different things. If someone wants to stop smoking, they'll oftentimes switch to nicotine patches. If someone wants to stop gambling, say their problematic form was casinos, they'll stop going to casinos and maybe they'll continue to buy a lottery ticket, and then we'll talk about that process. But harm reduction is something that we practice as humans every day, and the idea of harm reduction is to minimize risk. So we practice harm reduction by getting into the car and putting our seatbelt on. Our car is not always a safe place to be, so a seatbelt is a harm reduction approach. Or, if you're riding a bike, by putting a helmet on, that's considered harm reduction. So we all try to practice harm reduction in little ways. A person with substance use needs to start to practice it towards their problematic behaviors. So the idea in harm reduction is that a person is starting to engage in support, likely therapy, and that they can start to look at the consequences that come from using and some of the harms associated with using or engaging in the behavior. So harm reduction is important so we can create a plan. So oftentimes when I work with folks, it's about looking at the frequency, the amount, and the duration. And there's a lot of value in folks practicing harm reduction having a plan for themselves. So it promotes self-accountability. I'm only going to have 3 drinks a week, and I don't want to drink longer than over the span of 3 hours. And so once you have that plan, you have something to hold yourself accountable to. But this can also help with the beginning of repairing relationships, because communicating our plans to those that are concerned or trying to support us becomes important, so they know that you're working on the change process. Oftentimes it's not enough to just say, I'm stopping, I'm reducing. We have to provide information for ourselves to understand what that means, and oftentimes for other people. Now, abstinence is more clear cut, as I mentioned before. So when someone practices abstinence, they are reducing 100% of the harms of ingesting or engaging in a behavior like gambling. So it's very important to implement goals alongside of both harm reduction and abstinence. With the abstinence process, people go, usually depending on how long they've been using this behavior or substance, they'll go through a withdrawal period. So if people are poly users, or say you're drinking and gambling, or drinking and smoking cannabis, if you decide to abstain from all the behaviors at once, you're only going through the withdrawal process once. You're getting the dependency out of your system at the same time. So what I've noticed is that when people are willing to make the commitment of abstinence for all their behaviors at once, it feels really scary. But at the same time, it's more helpful for your system to go through that process once, then again, and then later down the road and again. However, some people I work with, they want to stop smoking first and then look at their gambling or their drinking. So really, it needs to be person dependent. So the most effective change in the realm of recovery is when the person who needs recovery decides, this is the change that I need to make and I'm ready to do that. And once they create a plan that they believe in, that's the most effective change that we see from people. Not because their arm is twisted from another to be in a certain space, or there's ultimatums presented. It's just not the most effective process in my experience. But with abstinence, you're going through the withdrawal process, and what's happening is over a period of time, usually 3 to 6 months, people's brains start to adjust, recognizing like, okay, I'm not drinking anymore, I'm not gambling anymore. So it tries to find this new sense of normal, and then the brain and body adjust to it. What also happens in abstinence is when we abstain, we recognize quicker probably why we've been using in the first place. So, I have anxiety, or I have depression, or I have this trauma that's been in my backpack for a long period of time. So the pain that we've been masking becomes more available to work with in the here and now. And the same with harm reduction is harm reduction or using alcohol or gambling is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a symptom of a much larger problem underneath. So harm reduction just allows someone to say, okay, I know alcohol's a problem. I want it to look different, and here's how. And I've been drinking because there's this trauma in the background, or because I don't have the right strategies to control my anxiety. So, either path that we pick, it sort of puts us on this larger path of well-being and health and truly understanding ourselves and the opportunity to repair relationships. So when a person enters my office, I oftentimes get a sense of their story, ask them to pick a path, and then we work from there. So that's just a little bit of information on harm reduction versus abstinence. That's all for today.